Another year, another failed project, Richard Harlow said, his voice slicing through the candlelit silence like a blade. Around the mahogany table, the clink of silverware froze midair. Crystal glasses caught the soft shimmer from the chandelier, reflecting the faint tremor that passed across my face. I could feel 20 pairs of eyes studying me, weighing my worth against the grandeur of the Harlow dining room. Thanksgiving at their Greenwich estate was never about gratitude. It was about rank. Every year, I told myself I could handle it, that this time I'd let their comments slide off like rain on glass. But hearing him again, so certain in his cruelty, made my throat tighten. Clara's glow, Vivian added sweetly, folding her linen napkin with surgical precision. Such a charming name for your little hobby. How many of those candles did you manage to sell this month, dear? Her tone carried that familiar poison wrapped in politeness. I placed my wine glass down carefully, making sure the base didn't tremble against the wood. Across the table, my husband David reached under and gave my knee a quiet squeeze, the silent signal we'd perfected over 4 years of dinners like this one. I could almost feel his apology through his fingertips. I kept my voice even. Actually, it's doing better than expected. Richard chuckled, the sound deep and indulgent. Better than expected for what, Clara? A weekend market stall. The laughter spread like perfume-thin artificial cloying. Madison, his eldest daughter, leaned forward, wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim of her glass. Dad, don't be cruel, she said with mock sympathy. Maybe her shop pays for those adorable little soy jars. More laughter. I smiled. It was the smile I'd practiced in the mirror, calm, unfazed, quietly dangerous. We just launched new wholesale contracts, I said. It's been a busy quarter. They heard the words, but not the warning inside them. Wholesale, Vivian repeated. To whom? Yoga studios, flea markets. To companies who value light, I replied. The room fell momentarily quiet, the kind of pause people take when they realize the prey might bite back. Then Richard barked out another laugh. You've got spirit, I'll give you that. Shame it's wasted on fragrances and glitter. My pulse hammered. For a heartbeat, I imagined standing up, telling them the truth, that my so-called candle shop was the front end of a global fintech network processing billions each month, that their own company was drowning soon to beg for my help. But I didn't. I just looked at the small flame flickering in the center of the table. It danced on the edge of the crystal holder, steady despite the draft. I raised my eyes and met Richard's across the long expanse of roasted duck and porcelain. It's doing better than you think, I said, softly. Something in my tone made him hesitate just long enough for silence to fill the room again. Vivian cleared her throat, eager to reclaim control. More wine, Clara? No, thank you. I have an early morning. A craft fair, Richard teased. David's hand tightened around mine under the table. No, I said. A meeting. I didn't elaborate. Let them laugh. Let them believe I was just a sentimental woman chasing the scent of lavender and wax. The candle between us flared slightly, then steadied again. They didn't know yet that their empire was burning from within and that I had already struck the match. The Harlows lived like tradition itself had written their story. Their estate wasn't just a house, it was a declaration. White stone columns framed the entrance, marble lions guarded the stairs, and portraits of unsmiling ancestors watched over every corridor like judges of old blood. They didn't simply dine, they performed. Every meal was a board meeting in disguise, every toast a proclamation of superiority. I had learned that quickly after marrying David. When I first stepped into that house, I thought I was entering a family. In truth, I was entering an institution. Richard Harlow, patriarch of the dynasty, had built his reputation on control. His name appeared on 100 plaques across New England libraries, foundations, even hospitals. He saw his legacy not as something to protect, but as something to wield. His handshake was as cold as his smile. To him, I was an experiment that had gone wrong, a modern woman with a degree, but without pedigree. He often said to David within my hearing, "You married charm, not strategy." Vivian, on the other hand, ruled through appearances. She orchestrated everything, the flowers, the menus, the guest lists, with the precision of a stage director. Her kindness existed only when witnessed by others. Alone, her eyes hardened like polished silver. Once, she had placed her hand gently on mine during brunch and said, You'd be such a darling addition to the Women's League if you just focused less on business. I smiled then too, because smiling was my only armor. Their daughter, Madison, was the natural heir of both their arrogance and insecurity. She lived in tailored perfection, always flaunting designer labels as though they could silence her own emptiness. Her husband, a venture capitalist who bragged about every minor investment, fit in perfectly. To them, money wasn't wealth, it was validation. David, my husband, was different once. I met him at Stanford before the family legacy sank its claws into him. He was kind, brilliant, a man who dreamed of innovation instead of inheritance. But somewhere between board meetings and family dinners, that light in him dimmed. When his father offered him a position at Harlow & Sons, he hesitated for months. I remember telling him, "Don't do it unless it's what you really want." He promised me it wasn't about the power, that it was about proving himself. I believed him. I wanted to. But power has gravity, and the Harlow's orbit was strong. Now, years later, I watched him play the role of the dutiful son. Every time Richard cut me off mid-sentence, David's shoulders would stiffen, his eyes would flicker toward me in quiet apology. He thought silence was protection. He didn't realize that silence in their world was consent. What the Harlows didn't understand was that beneath their legacy of polished mahogany and inherited wealth, cracks had begun to show. The world outside their gates had changed. Banks were being replaced by algorithms, boardrooms by code. But they refused to see it. Real business, Richard would say, is done over handshakes, not screens. I bit my tongue every time. The irony was almost poetic. While he sat polishing his trophies of the past, the future was quietly taking shape on my laptop in my apartment in the hours after midnight when the rest of the world slept. Their empire was built on reputation, mine on results. They measured success in dinner invitations and newspaper mentions. I measured it in growth charts and transaction speed. The difference was invisible to them, and that invisibility was my greatest weapon. They thought I belonged at the edge of their story, a decorative footnote in their family history. They were wrong. I was already writing the next chapter, and they just didn't know whose name would appear on the cover. 3 years earlier, my world was smaller, an apartment in Brooklyn where the ceilings cracked and the radiator hissed like an irritated cat. The scent of wax and coffee filled every corner. I worked from the kitchen table laptop balanced beside a box of Wicks, Ella's toys scattered across the floor. My daughter was only 4, then curious and bright, her laughter echoing down the narrow hallway. I used to tell her the flicker of each candle was a wish. When she slept, I would stay up coding until dawn, fingers stiff, eyes burning. The world saw Clara's glow as a cozy side hustle. They didn't see the spreadsheet tabs open behind every design, the endless hours refining an algorithm that would one day become Novalink's backbone. During the day, I packaged orders myself, handwriting notes to customers, printing labels that stuck to my fingers. At night, I read fintech reports and studied digital payment systems like scripture. My savings disappeared fast. The small business loan I applied for was denied twice, too new, too female, too domestic. I sold my engagement ring to buy a server subscription. David didn't know at first. He thought I was just keeping busy while he worked late at the bank. The truth was, I was terrified. Terrified of failing, terrified of being right. My mother used to say, "Some fires you build in secret, or people will try to blow them out before they burn." She was right, so I worked quietly. I taught myself code accounting logistics. Every candle I sold fed a small part of the machine underneath the payment infrastructure I called Project Nova. Its purpose was simple: help small online stores process payments securely without corporate banks taking the biggest cut. I wanted to give independence to people like me. I never intended to threaten the likes of Richard Harlow, but the more I built, the more potential I saw. 2 years in my apartment transformed into a war zone of boxes and prototypes. Ella slept beside the hum of routers. I called it her lullaby of progress. I missed birthdays, canceled dinners, let friendships fade. When David came home smelling of bourbon and boardrooms, I pretended not to notice the exhaustion in his eyes or the growing distance between us. He loved me, but he didn't understand this obsession, this need to prove that a woman working from her kitchen could outthink an empire. One night, he stood in the doorway watching me solder a circuit for the new payment terminal prototype. "You don't have to kill yourself over this, Clara," he said softly. "My parents already think you're pushing too hard." I looked up wax dust clinging to my hair. "Maybe that's the point," I said. "They think wrong." He sighed, kissed my forehead, and went to bed. I worked until sunrise. The first time Novalink's beta processed a live transaction, a $19 candle order from Chicago, I cried. Not because of the sale, but because it worked. Every variable, every late night, every quiet moment of doubt suddenly connected. That's when I realized something important. Silence was my shield. The less they noticed me, the freer I was to build. While Richard held cocktail parties for potential investors, I was constructing an invisible economy. While Vivian obsessed over image, I obsessed over code. My tools were not champagne glasses or press releases, they were servers and scripts. I didn't have a boardroom yet, but I had belief. Each flicker of candlelight reminded me of that. The flame didn't need to roar, it just needed oxygen. And one day, it would set the world on fire. By the third winter, the distance between my world and the Harlows had become a canyon. I'd stopped attending most of their social events claiming deadlines or childcare, but that didn't stop the whispers. Vivian's friends at the country club adored gossip more than golf, and apparently I was their favorite topic. The candle girl, they called me as if I were selling trinkets in a subway station. When Vivian hosted her annual winter charity luncheon, she forgot to send me the proper invitation. Instead, I found out about it through a post tagged by Madison, a photo of the grand table gold-rimmed china captioned, "Honoring Women Who Make a Difference." The irony wasn't lost on me. Still, I went. I dressed simply, cream sweater, dark jeans, minimal makeup. When I entered the ballroom, conversation thinned. Vivian's smile tightened like thread about to snap. "Clara, darling." How unexpected, she said, air-kissing both my cheeks. "We thought you'd be busy." "Crafting." Laughter rippled among the women. I smiled back. "I finished early," I said. The luncheon went as expected, polished small talk about investments, vacations, and private schools. When one of the guests asked what I'd been working on, Vivian jumped in before I could answer. "She runs a little shop online. Homemade candles, quite sweet, really. She's so creative." I opened my mouth, but Madison cut across her tone, syrupy. "Oh yes, and she gives them cute names like Financial Freedom and Morning Calm. Maybe we should order one for Dad's office. He could use the serenity." Another round of polite laughter. I didn't respond. Silence unnerves people more than anger, and mine stretched long enough to make them glance away, fidgeting with their napkins. "Actually," I said finally, "we just partnered with several international distributors. The candles are just the Surface product, though." Vivian blinked. "Surface." "It's a platform project," I explained lightly, "but I'm sure the details would bore you." She laughed too loudly. "You're adorable, dear. Always dreaming." Her hand brushed mine, the softest gesture of dismissal I'd ever felt. That evening, I came home to find David sitting in the kitchen scrolling through his phone. "Mom posted about you again," he said quietly. "Video clip from your talk at the Small Business Summit." She wrote, "So proud of our little entrepreneur for keeping busy." I felt heat rise up my neck. "Keeping busy?" I repeated. "That's what she thinks I've been doing. Clara, she doesn't mean harm. No, she means humiliation." I turned away before my anger cracked open. He followed me into the office. "You can't let them get to you." "They already did," I said. "Now I'll get to them." Over the next weeks, my determination hardened into steel. I expanded Novalink's beta into full service. The system now handled multi-currency conversions and AI-based fraud detection tools that even legacy banks struggled to implement. I hired 2 remote developers and 1 financial analyst, paying them out of the last of my savings. Every risk felt like jumping without a parachute, but I'd learned something from the Harlow's. Arrogance makes you predictable. Humility makes you invisible. By spring, our processing volume tripled. I registered Novalink Systems LLC, quietly using a law firm under non-disclosure. When I received the confirmation email, I sat in the dark for a long time, watching the cursor blink. That small flash of light on my screen reminded me of the flame at their dinner table, the one that refused to die, no matter how cold the air around it grew. I didn't post updates. I didn't brag. Let them laugh. Mockery was noise, and I was building in silence. Somewhere deep inside, I knew the day would come when their laughter would stop abruptly, when the same mouths that dismissed me would have to say my name with respect. But revenge wasn't what drove me now. It was justice. The quiet kind, the kind that doesn't need applause, only proof. By the time spring melted into the heavy warmth of early summer, the small office I rented above a Brooklyn coffee shop had become the control room of something much larger than I had ever dared imagine. 3 desks, 1 server rack, and an ocean of quiet ambition that was Novalink. Outside, buses groaned and coffee machines hissed, but inside, the air buzzed with code and purpose. The world thought I was still pouring wax and tying ribbons, but I was orchestrating a network that linked hundreds of online stores across 3 continents. Every order processed, every transaction verified, strengthened the veins of a system designed to outgrow me. Clara's Glow was the skin. Novalink was the skeleton. I signed non-disclosure agreements daily, routing payments for boutique retailers in Paris, furniture dealers in Singapore, fashion startups in Sao Paulo. None of them knew the company's owner was a woman whose family-in-law still mocked her for selling candles. That irony was delicious, but I didn't savor it long. I didn't have time. My routine became a loop of data analysis, late-night conference calls, and the hum of servers devouring electricity. I'd tuck Ella into bed, read her a story, then return to spreadsheets glowing blue against the dark. The growth numbers climbed like fire up dry wood. We hit our first million in processed payments, then 5, then 10. By the end of the year, Novalink's transaction volume rivaled regional banks. I kept every file locked, every signature encrypted under holding companies registered offshore. Only 2 people knew the truth, my attorney Priya Malhotra and my senior developer Thomas. "You could sell this for millions," Thomas said one night as we watched the dashboard refresh in real time. "Billions eventually." "I'm not selling," I said. "Not yet." "Then what's the plan?" I smiled. "To stay quiet until the noise comes to me." I didn't have to wait long. Word spread in the fintech world of an independent platform with impossible stability and seamless cross-border integration. Harlow & Sons, meanwhile, was bleeding. I read their quarterly reports under the soft hum of my desk lamp. Declining assets, outdated security systems, clients migrating to digital-first institutions. The legacy my father-in-law worshipped was rusting from the inside. Still, he continued to hold court at his marble desk, oblivious to the shifting ground beneath him. I'd heard from David that they were exploring partnerships with modern payment processors to revitalize the brand. He didn't know which company they would call. When he told me, half laughing, that his father planned to save the bank with a little tech magic, I just listened. I didn't tell him that the little tech magic already belonged to me. That night, I stood at the window, looking out over the city, the river glinting under streetlights, the skyline pulsing with hidden power. Somewhere in those towers, deals were being made. Fortunes, shifted names, traded. But the quiet office behind me was my empire, invisible yet unstoppable. The next morning, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar corporate email, a request for a meeting from Harlow & Sons, subject line, potential collaboration. I stared at it for a long time. My reflection looked back from the screen, calm, steady, unreadable. The match had been struck. The fire was coming home. The invitation arrived on heavy cream paper embossed with gold filigree as if wealth itself could be printed. The Harlow's annual charity gala was a social event disguised as benevolence. Richard called it a celebration of giving, though the only thing he ever gave was opportunity to admire himself. I hadn't planned to go, but David begged me. "It'll mean a lot to my parents," he said, straightening his tie. "Just for a few hours." I said yes, though I knew the evening would test every ounce of restraint I had. The ballroom at the Whitmore Hotel glittered with chandeliers and champagne. Waiters drifted between marble pillars carrying silver trays. The crowd was a sea of silk gowns and tuxedos, conversations layered with money's accent. When we entered, flashes popped from the cameras of society reporters. Vivian spotted me instantly. Her smile looked painted on. "Clara!" "How wonderful you made it," she said, her voice a melody of false surprise. "I was just telling Madison how well your little shop must be doing. You brought candles for the raffle. I hope I swallowed the sting." "No, just myself," I said evenly. "But thank you for the suggestion." She blinked, not expecting a reply that sharp. Madison, standing beside her with a glass of rosé, smirked. "You really should bring samples, you know. People here love handcrafted things like a nostalgic touch of the middle class." Laughter bubbled from the group around her. My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression calm. "I'll keep that in mind," I said, "although most of my clients prefer bulk shipments these days." Richard appeared behind them, larger than life in his midnight suit. "Bulk shipments of candles, my dear, you're single-handedly saving the economy." The group roared. I forced a smile, the kind that hides knives behind lips. "One customer at a time," I said. As the night wore on, I drifted to the edge of the crowd, standing near the silent auction table. I could breathe there. That's when I overheard two bankers talking quietly near the champagne fountain. "Harlow and Sons is in deep trouble," one whispered. "Liquidity crisis. Their tech division's 10 years behind. If they don't modernize, they're finished." My breath caught. The words rolled through me like electricity. "They're courting some fintech firms," the other man said. "Looking for a merger before the press catches on." I turned heart-pounding just as David approached with 2 glasses of wine. He handed me one. "You all right?" he asked. I nodded, smiling faintly. "Just thinking," I said. He didn't press. When the speeches began, Richard took the stage. He spoke of family honor tradition, the endurance of true values. The applause was thunderous. I looked up at him, the proud patriarch beneath crystal light, and wondered how it felt to preach stability while standing on quicksand. Later that night, as we drove home through the city's glimmering streets, David said softly, "They were rough tonight. I'm sorry." I stared out the window. "Don't be. They gave me clarity." "Clarity." "Yes," I said, "about what comes next." He glanced at me, puzzled. "You sounded different back there." I met his eyes. Maybe I finally stopped trying to fit in. The car fell silent. Outside, New York shimmered alive, restless, full of possibility. I felt something shift inside me, quiet but irreversible. The time for patience was over. The next morning, I opened my laptop, logged into Novalink's secure dashboard, and began writing an email. My subject line was simple: Acquisition Proposal Harlow and Sons. The email took me 3 hours to write and only 3 minutes to send. I drafted every line like a chess move, precise, polite, impossible to trace. To Richard and his board, it came from Novalink's business development division, signed by an alias I'd used before, C. Jennings, managing director. It was professional sterile, the kind of correspondence that opened doors in boardrooms full of men like him. Within 2 days, I had a reply. Harlow and Sons was interested in potential synergy. They requested a preliminary meeting with our executive team. I almost laughed at the phrasing. Synergy, the word men used when they needed saving but refused to say it out loud. I scheduled the meeting for Friday 9 a.m. in Novalink's Midtown office. The irony that they would walk into a space built by the same woman they'd spent years mocking was almost poetic. That week I worked with Priya, my attorney, to finalize the acquisition draft. "You're sure you want to go through with this quietly?" she asked, scanning the contract. "If they find out before the board signs, they'll try to block it. That's why they won't find out," I said. "Not until it's too late." Priya smiled slightly. "You've got the patience of a saint and the precision of a surgeon." "Neither," I said. "Just experience." Meanwhile, David was unaware. I didn't want to drag him into the storm before it hit. He came home late from the bank one evening, shoulders heavy with exhaustion. "Dad's furious," he said. "Another client pulled their assets. They're desperate for a partnership with someone called Novalink. Ever heard of them?" I looked up from my laptop. "The name sounds familiar," I said lightly. "They're apparently cutting edge. Digital infrastructure payment systems, the works. The board thinks it could save the company." I sipped my tea to hide the tremor of amusement in my throat. "Sounds promising," I said. "Maybe they'll finally learn to appreciate online businesses." He chuckled, not catching the undertone. "If only. Dad says real business happens in person, not through screens. I closed my laptop gently. Maybe he'll change his mind soon. On Friday morning, the elevator doors opened to reveal Richard, his CEO, Harvey Quinn, and two senior board members. They looked slightly out of place in our minimalist office, men of mahogany and oil paintings, surrounded by glass and steel. I greeted them with a calm nod. "Welcome to Novalink," I said. Richard frowned. "You work here, I manage communications," I said smoothly. "Our founder's unavailable today, but I'll be representing her." He grunted. "Let's get this over with." We entered the conference room. The city stretched behind me through floor-to-ceiling windows, sunlight glinting off distant skyscrapers. The irony wasn't lost on me, years of them towering over me, and now I literally stood above them. The presentation began. Thomas handled the tech demo, Priya outlined the legal structure, and I led the financial projections. As the slides progressed, Richard leaned forward, captivated despite himself. "Your system could integrate directly with our core operations," he admitted. "Exactly," I said. "With the right agreement, Novalink can bring Harlow & Sons fully digital in under 6 months. "Impressive," said Harvey. "We could finalize a merger proposal by next quarter." "A merger," Priya echoed softly. "That's not the term we're using. It's an acquisition." The silence that followed was exquisite. Richard's eyes narrowed. "Whose acquisition? Ours," I said, smiling. "But don't worry, your board will approve. They need this more than you realize." After they left, Thomas whistled. That was intense. I exhaled slowly. It's just the opening act. Over the weekend, headlines whispered about Harlow & Sons exploring digital partnerships. Vivian posted pictures from a brunch captioned, "Family legacy stands strong." I watched her smile on the screen and almost pitied her. She didn't know yet that legacy meant nothing if it wasn't built to last. The deal papers waited in my safe, ready for signature. Monday morning, I'd take the next step. The stage was set. The empire was about to turn itself over, and all I had to do was watch it happen. It was the last Sunday of summer when Vivian decided to host what she called a family catch-up. The table gleamed under the chandelier, polished to a mirror finish. Richard sat at the head as always, his silver cufflinks catching the light like medals from a forgotten war. Madison was already there when we arrived, swirling wine in her glass and smiling as if she knew a secret. David looked uneasy, tugging at his collar. I knew this dinner wasn't about family. It was about control. "You've been hard to reach lately," Vivian began, buttering her bread with surgical precision. "David says you're quite busy. The little shop must be thriving." "It keeps me occupied," I said calmly. "Occupied," Richard repeated. "A woman should have hobbies." His tone dripped with condescension. I could feel the familiar heat rising in my chest, but I kept my voice level. "You could call it that. Perhaps you can make something for the office," Madison added. Dad could use a calming scent. Her smirk widened. Maybe something called desperation. The table erupted in laughter. Even David's lips twitched before he caught himself. I placed my fork down, each movement deliberate. "Actually, I said I've been working on something new. It might interest you, Richard." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh, expanding your craft market." "Something like that." I met his gaze steadily. "A digital platform. We build financial infrastructure for online vendors, secure payment channels, fraud protection data analytics. You know those things banks are struggling to modernize." The room went still for a beat. Vivian laughed first, brittle and high. "Oh, Clara always so imaginative. You should write novels." Richard chuckled too. "Leave finance to those who understand it, dear. Algorithms can't replace experience." "Experience like yours?" I asked softly. "Running a company that hasn't updated its systems since the last financial crisis." David shot me a warning look, but I didn't stop. "I read your quarterly report." "Rough quarter, wasn't it?" His eyes narrowed. "How would you know that public information?" I said. "At least the parts you haven't tried to hide." Madison set her glass down too hard. "You've got some nerve." "No," I said quietly. "Just memory." I could feel the tension tightening around the table like wire. Vivian's voice cut through it. "Honestly, Clara, this tone is unbecoming." "You sound resentful." "Maybe," I said. Or maybe I'm just tired of pretending respect for people who mistake arrogance for legacy. The silence that followed was long enough for me to hear the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Richard leaned forward, face-red veins rising in his neck. "You forget yourself," he said. "You're in my house." "Am I?" I asked. "Funny because it feels like I've been living in your shadow." David reached for my hand under the table, but I pulled away. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. "You know," I continued, "I used to think you were untouchable, but the truth is, you're standing on sand." I rose, smoothing the fabric of my dress. "Enjoy dinner." "Where are you going?" Vivian demanded. "Home," I said. "I have a meeting early tomorrow." Richard scoffed. "Another craft fair." I looked back over my shoulder. "Something like that." His laughter followed me down the hall, echoing through the marble corridor like a dying song. Outside, the evening air was cool and sharp. I stood by the car, breathing deeply until the tremor in my hands steadied. Inside that house, they believed they'd won again, that they'd silenced me. But they didn't realize silence was never surrender, it was preparation. By morning, their signatures would be inked on the documents that sealed their fate. The candle had burned long enough. Now it was time to let the fire spread. The morning of the meeting felt unnaturally quiet, like the city itself was holding its breath. I woke before dawn, the sky still bruised purple, and brewed coffee I never drank. My reflection in the mirror looked composed, but the calm was deliberate. Every breath measured, every gesture planned. I dressed in a gray suit, the same shade Vivian once dismissed as off the rack. It felt symbolic. The uniform of a woman underestimated one too many times. When I arrived at Harlow & Sons, the marble lobby gleamed under cold fluorescent light. A receptionist recognized me, but hesitated, unsure whether to greet the daughter-in-law or the executive. "Mrs. Harlow," she said uncertainly. "Miss Jennings," I corrected, smiling. "Here for the board session." The elevator ride was long enough to remember every insult, every smirk, every time I'd been told to stay in my lane. The doors opened onto the top floor, the inner sanctum of the Harlow Empire. Dark wood paneling oil portraits, a view of the river. Men in suits murmured in small groups, unaware of the tectonic shift about to split their world open. At precisely 9 o'clock, CEO Harvey Quinn entered, followed by Richard Vivian Madison and the rest of the board. The air smelled of leather dust and arrogance. Richard froze when he saw me seated at the table. "What the hell is she doing here?" he barked. "This is a closed session." Harvey's tone was even. "Clara's presence is required. She represents Nova Link in today's proceedings." The color drained from Richard's face. "Nova Link? She's a shopkeeper, not an executive." His voice cracked, echoing off the paneled walls. Vivian looked around, confused, clutching her pearls as if they might steady her. "Surely this is a misunderstanding," she said. "You can't mean—" "We can," Harvey interrupted. "And we do." I rose slowly, letting the silence settle before I spoke. "Good morning. For those who don't know me, I'm Clara Jennings, founder and majority owner of Nova Link Systems." The reaction was instant, chairs scraping papers, rustling whispers spreading like wildfire. Richard stood, fists tightening. "That's impossible." "You sell candles." "Correction," I said. "I built a digital infrastructure that supports over 200 million transactions annually." The candles were the test case. I pressed the remote, and the screen behind me, lit with charts, growth curves, global maps, transaction flows. The board members leaned forward, captivated despite themselves. "Last quarter," I continued, "Nova Link processed more online payments than Harlow & Sons has handled in the last 5 years combined." Vivian's lips parted soundlessly. Madison's phone slipped from her hand onto the table with a dull thud. You can't be serious," Richard stammered. "Completely," I said. "Your bank approached us for partnership. We reviewed your books. What we found was alarming outdated infrastructure, security vulnerabilities, declining trust ratios. Your clients are already leaving." I advanced the slide. "You thought you were acquiring us. In reality, you signed an agreement allowing Novalink to assume controlling interest in Harlow & Sons." The room exploded. Voices overlapped, men shouting over one another, papers fluttering through the air. Harvey remained calm. "Everything is legitimate," he said. "The board ratified the deal this morning. Clara's team finalized the filings at 8:45. "This is treachery," Richard shouted. "You tricked us." "No," I said softly. "You underestimated me." He turned to the others. "You can't let this stand." "I built this company, you built a monument," I said. "And monuments don't move." The world did. Madison stood abruptly trembling. "You ruined us." "No," I said again. "I saved what could still be saved." I handed her a folder. Inside are transition plans. Every employee keeps their job, every client keeps their account. But executive leadership changes effective immediately. Richard's voice dropped to a hoarse whisper. "You can't take my name." "I don't need your name," I said. "I'm giving it a future." For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the city beyond the glass. Vivian finally spoke, voice thin as paper. "Why, Clara?" "We're family." I met her eyes. "Family doesn't mock you at dinner tables. Family doesn't measure your worth by pedigree. You taught me that silence is weakness. You were wrong. Silence is strategy." Richard sank into his chair, deflated. The man who had once filled every room now seemed smaller, like air leaking from a balloon. "You planned this," he said. "From the start." "Not from the start," I replied. "From the moment you laughed." Harvey cleared his throat. "We'll distribute press releases within the hour. Novalink Holdings will serve as parent company under the Harlow brand, preserving its heritage." I turned to the board. Heritage is valuable, but it's time heritage met innovation. As the meeting adjourned, the photographers from the corporate journal entered, cameras flashing. Richard covered his face, muttering curses. I stood beneath the chandelier, every bulb reflecting in the polished floor like 1,000 tiny flames. For years they had joked about my candles, about my little spark. Now the light filled the entire room, and not one of them could bear to look at it directly. The news hit before noon. By the time I stepped out of the boardroom, reporters were already gathered outside, microphones raised like bayonets. The headline rolled across financial networks within the hour: "Novalink acquires Harlow & Sons in historic digital takeover." The words felt surreal even to me. I hadn't just rewritten a contract. I had rewritten an era. I watched it all unfold from my office window. Cameras flashing, executives rushing into elevators, chaos rippling through a dynasty that once believed itself eternal. Down below, Richard's black limousine waited, but he didn't move for several minutes. He sat inside the boardroom, staring at the wall where portraits of Harlow ancestors loomed in silent judgment. When he finally stood, his shoulders sagged. "It's over," he muttered to Harvey. "No, sir," Harvey said gently. "It's evolved." Vivian didn't take it as gracefully. She stormed into my office, her pearls rattling against her collarbone. "How dare you humiliate this family?" she hissed. "You've made us a laughingstock." I turned from the window, calm. "No, Vivian. I made you relevant again." "Relevant," she spat. "You've destroyed Richard's legacy." "His legacy was dying," I said. "I just gave it a pulse." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time since I'd known her, she seemed speechless. Her hand trembled as she adjusted her ring, a nervous tic she couldn't hide. "You think you've won," she said, "but power doesn't last." I smiled. "Neither does arrogance." She left without another word, the click of her heels echoing like gunfire down the hall. Later that day, David appeared in my doorway. His tie was loose, his face pale. "You really did it," he said quietly. "You didn't just fix them, you took them." I waited for anger, for betrayal, but his expression was something else entirely, awe mixed with guilt. "I didn't know, Clara. I swear." "I know you didn't," I said. "That's why it worked." He ran a hand through his hair. "Dad's furious. Mom's hiding in the car. Madison's crying in the restroom." I exhaled. "They'll recover, or they won't. Either way, this was inevitable." "They're saying you played them." "I didn't play anyone," I said. "I just refused to lose." That evening, the board finalized the leadership transition. Richard's resignation was framed as retirement. My title, Executive Chair of Harlow Digital Group, a subsidiary of Novalink Holdings. I signed the paperwork with steady hands. The weight that had lived in my chest for years lifted not with joy, but with quiet finality. Justice rarely feels triumphant, it just feels done. Outside, storm clouds gathered heavy and metallic. I drove home through the rain, the city lights blurring into gold streaks against the windshield. David sat beside me in silence. "They'll never forgive me," I said softly. "Maybe they shouldn't," he replied. "But they should thank you." I smiled faintly. "That's not why I did it." "Then why?" "Because they thought I was nothing," I said, and I wanted to prove to myself that I was more than their silence. When we reached home, the answering machine blinked with missed calls. Reporters, investors, old classmates. Everyone wanted a statement, a quote, a headline. I ignored them all. I walked into my office, opened the safe, and placed the signed merger documents inside. The folder bore both company seals, one gilded and traditional, the other sleek and minimal. Past and future bound together. As I closed the door, thunder rolled outside. Somewhere downtown, the Harlow name still glowed in gold letters above the old bank building. By tomorrow, a new sign would be installed beneath it, a Novalink company. Richard's empire hadn't collapsed overnight, it had evolved under the quiet hand of the woman he never saw coming. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel angry, I just felt free. A year passed, and the world looked different, sharper, cleaner, quieter. The Harlow name still shimmered in gold above the old building downtown, but now the words beneath it glowed even brighter, a Novalink company. The merger that once shocked the financial world had become a case study in corporate reinvention. The same magazines that ignored my small business now called me the architect of modern banking rebirth. I didn't do interviews. I didn't need to. My work spoke for itself. What mattered to me wasn't the applause, it was the balance I'd built from ashes. Inside the renovated headquarters, the atmosphere had changed. Paper files became digital archives, and the echo of arrogance had faded from the halls. Young analysts now discussed innovation, not inheritance. A massive LED wall displayed real-time analytics, a constant pulse of progress. Sometimes I would pause there watching the graphs rise and fall, remembering the nights I coded alone in that Brooklyn apartment. The same heartbeat, just amplified. Richard no longer occupied the corner office. He was listed as chairman emeritus, an honorary title without power. He still came in once a week, walking slower now, his once commanding voice reduced to polite greetings. I saw him standing at the window one afternoon, staring at the skyline. "Never thought I'd live to see this," he said without turning. "The world changing this fast." I joined him. "The world didn't change Richard. You just stopped watching." He nodded slightly. "You were right," he murmured. "About everything." Then quieter. "I'm sorry." It wasn't an apology meant to erase years of cruelty, but it was something a crack in the marble. I left him with it. Vivian had retreated to the country club circuit, her circle of admirers smaller now. After the merger, she discovered that her lifestyle credit card, spa, memberships, private charities was funded through outdated accounts that no longer existed. When she tried to access them, she called me in fury. "My card's been declined at the club. This is humiliating." I had smiled into the phone. "Don't worry, Vivian. Novalink's system must have flagged it for migration. We'll get you set up with a new digital wallet." There was silence on the other end before she hung up. She hasn't called since. Madison fared differently. When her husband's venture firm folded under investigation for mismanagement, I quietly offered her a junior position at one of Novalink's outreach subsidiaries. It wasn't revenge, it was realism. The job required humility, something she'd never practiced. "Why would you offer me this?" she asked, tears streaking the perfect foundation on her cheeks. "Because everyone deserves a second chance," I said, "even those who never gave one." David, meanwhile, found his footing in the new world we'd built. He no longer worked for his father's shadow, but as an independent consultant for Novalink's social impact division. Watching him teach financial literacy workshops to single mothers made me see the man I fell in love with all those years ago, the one untouched by legacy. We weren't the same people we'd been, but we'd survived together, and that counted for something. At home, life was simple. Ella turned 8 and insisted on having her birthday cake shaped like a candle. "Because you made light, Mommy," she said proudly. I laughed, my throat tightening. "Some lessons you can't teach. Children absorb them through love." Sometimes, late at night, I sat by the lake behind our new house. The reflection of city lights shimmered across the water, soft and unsteady like memory itself. The empire that once belittled me had become the foundation for something better. Not vengeance, not victory balance. The justice that endures doesn't shout, it simply endures. I still kept a single candle on my desk, vanilla cedar my first prototype. I never lit it. It reminded me that power doesn't have to blaze to exist. It can stay quiet, waiting glowing softly beneath the surface until it's needed again. They invited me to speak at a Women in Business conference the following spring. The stage was set inside a glass atrium overlooking the Hudson, the kind of place where light falls like grace. Rows of women filled the seats, entrepreneurs, executives, dreamers who still doubted themselves in quiet ways. As I stepped to the podium, the applause rose like a wave and then settled into stillness. I looked at them and saw versions of myself hopeful, scared, underestimated. They used to laugh at me, I began. Not strangers, family. A murmur rippled through the crowd. They called my work a hobby. They told me to stay small, polite, grateful. But success doesn't live where you're comfortable. It grows in the dark while no one is clapping yet. I told them what I never said to the press, that every insult had been a blueprint, every dismissal a direction. Silence, I said, isn't weakness. It's strategy. When they can't hear your plans, they can't stop them. The audience leaned forward, the air thick with recognition. You don't have to shout to prove your worth, I continued. You just have to keep building while they talk. When I finished, the applause was long and full. Not the polite kind, but the kind that comes from people who've carried the same bruises. Afterward, I walked through the hallway of the conference center, shaking hands, smiling for photos. Near the exit, a familiar voice stopped me. You spoke well, Richard said quietly. He looked older, smaller in his tailored suit. His hair had turned white at the edges, his confidence weathered but not gone. I came because I wanted to see what you built. And I asked. He glanced around the room where my company's banners hung beside his family's old logo. I see it, he said, and I see why I never did before. His eyes were wet, and for a moment I remembered the man who'd once toasted to legacy not knowing his would depend on me. Thank you, he said the words soft and heavy, for saving what I was too proud to protect. Vivian didn't attend. I heard she'd moved to Arizona running a boutique for luxury linens. Madison sent flowers, a gesture of peace I accepted but never replied to. David waited backstage, smiling. You sounded like someone who finally exhaled, he said. Maybe I did. I answered. That night, I stood by the river outside Wind, carrying the city's hum across the water. The skyline shimmered glass and steel, old and new, intertwined. I thought about how far silence had carried me, about every moment I'd swallowed my anger and turned it into design code and strategy. The world had mocked candles once, and now the very company that laughed had become a beacon. Funny how light works. It doesn't argue with darkness. It just outlasts it. At home, Ella was asleep, her nightlight flickering like a heartbeat. I sat at my desk, the single vanilla cedar candle still unlit beside me. I finally struck a match. The flame rose steady and warm. For the first time in years, I let myself watch it burn. Not as a reminder of struggle, but as a symbol of peace. Everything that needed to be said had already been proven. The rest was quiet. If you've ever been underestimated, I would tell anyone who asked, don't waste time proving them wrong. Build until they have no choice but to see you. The candle's flame trembled once, then steadied, casting gold across the room. Somewhere far away, the city lights flickered in reply. For a long moment, I just watched, breathing in the soft scent of cedar and victory, the scent of a life reclaimed through silence. And as the night deepened, one truth lingered, clear and simple. Sometimes the loudest power in the world is the one that never has to raise its voice.